on a critical subject, which of course has been mentioned here by my predecessors, that is the subject of climate change. And my topic today is on adaptation to and mitigation against climate change. Now, I will not belabor to take you through that slide because I think this is common knowledge. We are all aware that tea is an important commodity for East Africa and contributes significantly to the economies of all the 5 East African countries. So I will not spend time on that. Now, the question is, what is climate change? There's been a lot of debate, a lot of discussions on climate change. But basically, climate change is defined as change in global or regional climate patterns. And this results as a consequence of increasing carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. Now, there are 2 terminologies that are frequently utilized, especially when referring to climate change. One is called El Nino, the other one is La Nina. And El Nino is the warming of the sea surface temperature that results in increased precipitation. The converse is true when you talk about La Nina, because La Nina, on the other hand, results in less precipitation and consequently drought conditions. Now, depending on the strength of El Nino, it has been estimated that the increased precipitation as a consequence of these global phenomena can result in increase in its yields by a magnitude of about 10 to 20%. Now, sorry for that. The question is, having defined the terminology, is climate change real or is it a fiction? Because it's important for us to answer that question. Is it real or is it a fiction? Now, for us to be able to determine whether indeed it is real, it's critical for us to do scenario analysis. It is important for us to do data analysis, to look at long-term weather data, and therefore determine whether there have been significant shifts in such data. Secondly, we need also to look for the empirical evidence and also use that data to do all manner of analysis to validate the existence of these changes that I'm talking about. Now, I want to give you a snapshot of some of the evidences that are globally now utilized to actually show that indeed climate change is real. Now, before you is simply a plot of temperature, global mean temperature, and the points are plotted all the way from the 1800s to somewhere around 2015. Now, you will see that if you are to insert line plots or line curves around those points of temperature, you'll agree with me that there has been a linear increase of temperature all the way from the 1900s to the current time. But the increase has been higher over the last 50 or so years. Because if you look from 1940 onwards, you will see that the slope, that is a green line, is steeper than the red line, which tells you, yes, temperature is increasing, but the increase has been more significant over the last 50 years or so. And indeed, therefore, this is one evidence that climate is changing. Now, above there, I have listed some of the warmest years, and apparently 2019 may go down as one of the warmest years ever. As we speak right now, while I was coming for this conference, I read an article that Europe is sweltering under heat. Continental Europe, some places are recording close to 40 degrees centigrade in summer. Unprecedented. So things are happening. Similarly, because of these changes, a group of eminent scientists have already written a letter to the global leaders, warning them about the risks associated with global climate change. Now, I talked about the increasing sea surface temperature, and this is one of the things that has been recorded over time. And you can see again on our graph that since 1850, there has been a gradual increase in the sea surface temperature. Now, that causes, of course, expansion of water, because when you warm water, it expands, and therefore you have rising sea levels. And that has already been observed. So there's evidence that climate change is real. Closer home, is there evidence of climate change in East Africa? And the answer is yes. We don't need to look far. Look at Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest peak in Africa. At one point, the top was totally covered with snow, but about 82% of the ice cap has already been lost as a consequence of global warming. And it's postulated that if this trend continues in the next 50 to 20 years, that ice cap will be totally lost. Again, evidence that there's climate change. Now, are there indicators of climate change, especially closer home here in East Africa? I have told you about the Mount Kilimanjaro. I have mentioned about increasing temperature, and I'll give you data to support that view. Decreasing and erratic rainfall, and also increasing frequency of extreme weather events, such as floods, drought, frost, and hail. And apparently, all these things that I'm mentioning here have already been recorded in tea areas. So we are not immune as an industry. Sorry, this thing is moving very fast. So that is the rainfall trend. And I'm just taking a snapshot of some certain tea areas just to show you what has been happening. Sorry, you can't see it, but I can see it here. ICT? Apologies for that. I can see it here in front of me, but you're not able to see it there. I don't know what has happened. Any solution, ICT? Well, the story I was giving as they tried to sort it out is that I have picked a snapshot of the weather variables in certain tea areas. And I have taken Kericho, which is a home of tea in Kenya, just one of the areas, and tried to plot the change in rainfall trends between 1950 to date. 1950 to date. That's a period of over 60 years. Now, when you look at that plot, which I was unfortunately trying to show you there, you will see that, of course, there are the annual variations in precipitation. And therefore, one year you have a lot of rainfall, the next year you have less. But generally, when you look at that trend, it seems to indicate something. It seems to indicate that there has been a gradual decrease in the amount of precipitation received in Kericho, which is a major tea area. It's unfortunate that you're not able to see that, but I think because of time, I may not be able to wait until they have resolved this, so I will still proceed. So there's evidence to that effect that rainfall has actually been decreasing. And indeed, when I have done further analysis of that data from 1950 to date, and done what is called a regression analysis to try and regress the amounts of rainfall against time, I have gotten a very nice line plot, which seems to indicate that there has been an annual decrease of 4.52 millimeters of rain every year over the 52-year period. Which means over the 52-year period, rain has been decreasing at a rate of 4.5 millimeters per year. And therefore, if you multiply that over the over 50-year period, you are saying we have lost over 250 millimeters of rain. That is what was being shown there. You can see the statement at the bottom there. So therefore, rainfall has been decreasing. And that is in a major T area. Now, we also went ahead to analyze what is called the soil water deficit. That is a dryness of the soil. Every year, the soil accumulates some level of dryness which is measurable. And we call that dryness soil water deficit. And the soil water deficit is most acute during the dry months of January to April. And then we plotted that decade by decade. That is what you see there. Unfortunately, it's not complete. Decade by decade. And you will see that the soil water deficit, the last bar on your right, that should be on your right, that reads minus 48. The measure of soil water deficit is always a minus because it's a deficit. The deficit there is largest compared to the others. And therefore, we are saying in terms of a time series from the 1950s to date, the dryness of the soil is increasing as we progress decade by decade. Every 10 years, you can see those bars are becoming longer on the negative side, which tells you that we are increasingly getting drier soils as time proceeds. And that's not good for tea business because this is a crop, because tea needs water. And anytime you have a soil water deficit greater than 120 millimeters, it becomes limiting for tea production. That is 300. That is already far limiting. Now, let's look at the temperature trend. That is what I have there. Sorry, it's back. Thank you very much. We're back. So that's trends in temperature in Kericho again, plotted from the 1950s all the way to 2015. And then on the right, I have given you the 2016, 2017, 2018 numbers. Now, when you take a casual look at that plot, you may not be able to see much. But I put it to you that there's a gradual increase in temperature, in mean temperature. And if you are to insert the 2016, 2017, 2018, they'll all be above 17 degrees C. As you can see, at one point, we had temperatures, mean temperatures of 14, 15. But now we are headed to 17, 18. Tells you something is happening. Now, the same, a little bit closer analysis. A regression line is drawn. And the regression line shows clearly that there is an annual rise of 0.016 degrees centigrade, which is significant statistically, over the period of 52 years. So temperature, my brothers and sisters, is increasing, rainfall is decreasing. So climate change is real. Again, the same data presented decade-wise. 1969, 79, 89, 99, 2009. We're about to put the 2019 data after we complete the year. And you will see there's an average rise of 0.2 degrees C every 10 years. You finish 10 years, 0.2 degrees C. And that's consistent. Those are the changes that we have witnessed in the major tea growing areas in Kenya, west of the Rift Valley and east of the Rift Valley. You can see they may look like subtle, very subtle changes, but they are real. They are very real. Let's quickly look at some of the tea areas in Uganda. I think the lady who spoke this morning about the tea story in Uganda, you talked about Bushenyi. This is your story. This is your annual maximum temperature. And you can see from the mid-1980s, I've inserted a line plot to show you the general trend. There's an increase in the temperature. Significant, very significant. That is northern Tanzania where they grow tea, you know, in the Rwanzoris, not the Rwanzoris, what do they call these mountains? In Usambaras. That is the situation. in Lushoto. Again, similar trend. Mid-80s, again, an increase in temperature. Sorry, that is southern Tanzania. You know the southern highlands of Tanzania where they grow tea. Again, mid-80s. See, the same trend, increase in temperature. Southern Tanzania, rainfall, decrease, just like Kericho. You can see from the mid-80s, again, decrease in rainfall, precipitation. Temperature in Giswati, Rwanda, increase from the 80s. Same story. Rainfall in Giswati, no indication of change in rainfall trend in Rwanda. But we have seen Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, similar trends. Rainfall going down, temperature rising. Rwanda, temperature rising, no significant change in rainfall. Now, the question is therefore, having demonstrated that it's real, is there any effect of climate change on tea production in Kenya? Well, somebody may argue there's no significant impact on tea production because after all, Kenya's production volume has significantly increased over the years, irrespective of the climate change. But that is a very simplistic way of looking at it because in Kenya, growth in production is as a consequence of expansion of area rather than enhanced productivity per unit area. Now, when you superimpose the incidence of La Nina or El Nino on that production curve, you will see every time we had an event recorded as a La Nina or El Nino, then you can see the impact. The arrow that shows down, that is a La Nina, depresses yield by a magnitude of 10-20%. And when you have the star, that is an El Nino, increased precipitation, you get increased spike of production. So there's impact. There's impact on production. And to study this a little bit more, you can only model yields, not at national level, but at research level. So here, what we have done is to look at the average productivity of tea in a research farm. And you can see that the yield in the research farm, which is called Timbilil, the blue line, mirrors very closely the national average productivity in the country, which tells us, therefore, that we can use research yield data to extrapolate what happens at the national level if we want to study the impact of climate change on productivity of tea. And therefore, based on that assumption, we have gone ahead to look at the impact of individual weather variables on productivity. And here, we have mean temperature vis-a-vis the research yields. The research yields are in red, temperature in blue. And you will see, between May and December, there's a very good positive correlation. That is, as temperature rises, yield increases. But not so for January to May. Because during that time, water is limiting. Because if you look at that period, temperature is high, but there's no water, there's no rain. So water becomes limiting, and that's why you have SWD, soil water deficit. Now what that tells us is that if water is not limiting, there's nothing wrong with temperature increasing. That is what it simply says. That if temperature can increase and we retain rainfall, there's no problem. We will in fact benefit by having increased yields. But if increase in temperature is accompanied by increase in soil water deficit, woe unto ourselves, then we have a problem. We have a challenge. And based on that, what we have done is to look at the effect of temperature on national production. And as I have said, increasing temperature results in higher production, as long as water is not limiting. And that is what it shows. Okay? Now, as I said, water is critical. Water is actually the most critical production factor here. And we have shown that as the soil gets drier, as the soil water deficit increases beyond 120, then it begins to limit tea production. And that's why we are saying the critical soil water deficit for tea production is 120 millimeters. And therefore, water becomes the most significant production factor that we must ensure we somehow are able to deal with. And hence, those who may consider irrigation and who have water can consider irrigation to remove this limiting factor. Thank you. I'm about to finish. Now, we have therefore used this data to try and do some modeling. We know where tea is grown in Kenya, east and west of the Rift Valley. Those are the two major areas. On your right is the east of the Rift Valley, on your west is the Great Rift Valley. I mean the west of the Rift Valley. And the green area is the most suitable. And as it gets red, it's less suitable. That is what that graph shows. And we have used what is called the Maxent model. And it simply marks currently the areas that are considered suitable for tea production. Now, if we extrapolate that the current trends we have seen based on the analysis that we have shown continue, where temperature is increasing and precipitation is decreasing, what happens in 2050? That's the question. And that is what I want to show you. That by 2020, sorry, not even 2050, by 2020, there's a slight shift. Because temperature is increasing, rainfall is decreasing. And therefore, what happens is that by 2020, generally, the suitability of most of the districts remain more or less constant, but there's a slight change. But productivity is not significantly impacted. And therefore, we may be able to maintain productivity and even quality. Because after all, 2020 is just near. It's just around the clock, around the corner. What happens by 2050? Now, by 2050, if you are looking at those graphs, the green areas have shrunk, especially to the west of the Rift Valley. And you see that? West of the Rift Valley. The green, which we said is the most suitable ideal climate for tea, has shrunk significantly. And most of the green still is retained at the central Kenya highlands because of increasing temperature. So there's a shift, and productivity decreases, is anticipated to marginally decrease west of the Rift Valley because of soil water deficit, and also because of increasing temperature, quality may become compromised, especially in the west. Those are the predictions. Now, the same is presented in a graphical form. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but what it shows, this graph, is that suitability for tea production in Kenya is now shifting even to higher and higher altitudes. For us who are in the tea industry some 10 years ago, we recall there was an attempt by the government of Kenya to introduce tea in certain areas. For those who come from Kenya, there's a place called Kinale as you go to Nairobi, and even Olenguruoni, which were very, very cold areas. And in Kinale, when we introduced tea, it refused to grow completely because of temperature limitation. Now, those areas are slowly becoming more suitable for tea. And those that were more suitable, the lower altitude areas, are becoming less suitable for tea. So those shifts can be expected as we move forward. And that is what that graph, in summary, says. Very quickly, extreme weather events. We know that these are also part and parcel of climate change, especially hail. And hail can be devastating. You can lose up to 2 million kilos a single hail event. We have seen that these have become more unpredictable. Numbers are increasing, especially west of the Great Rift Valley. Frost is another serious problem associated again with drought. It comes during January to April. And you can see a frosted field, you know, the one that looks brown, that is tea. Very low temperatures at night. These are called desert-like climate events, you know. Very hot during the day, very cold at night. And it frosts the tea. the tea ferments in the field. And the graph shows you that tea that is receiving more than optimal levels of nitrogen fertilizer gets more affected by frost because the leaves are more succulent. And because they are more succulent, they have more water. And frost comes and the water in the leaf freezes, ruptures the cells, the polyphenols are oxidized in the leaf, and therefore the leaf ferments in the field. So the cure, don't apply too much nitrogen if you are anticipating frost. And we had serious frost incidents this year. 2019, I went through Limuru, parts of Limuru. Oh, it was serious, very bad. Now, we have seen that some interventions can solve some of these problems, especially modification of tea microclimate, either using shade and shelter. And you can see there that indeed when you plant certain trees, even the yields go higher because of modification of the tea microclimate. And they protect tea against hail, they protect tea against frost, and even sunscorch. I remember there used to be a debate, do we return? There was a time we used to have shade in plantations. Kenya removed them, say they were depressing yields. But it was because already temperatures were not limiting. I mean, temperatures were okay. But as now temperatures continue to increase, maybe just like India and others who have shade and shelter as part and parcel of tea cultivation, we may have to go back there. Then we need to do breeding. We have to develop varieties that are better buffered against drought, against diseases, against pests, against all these things, cold weather, and so on and so forth. And the Tea Research Foundation has been doing this. They have developed very many varieties. But at the end of the day, when I speak to farmers, I tell them, it doesn't matter how many clones the Tea Research has developed. How many as a farmer are you accessing? Because we must enhance the genetic diversity of our fields by diversifying the number of clones and the types of clones that we plant so that we ensure ourselves against the vagaries of climate change. It's very important. That's called genetic buffering. So you shouldn't plant one variety or one clone in a shamba, irrespective of how good it is. Thank you. Good agricultural practices, very important. Please, fertilizer is also, can be a good input, but can also be a bad input. When you put too much fertilizer, you also deny your plants water. So when drought comes, they die most. That is mortality rate of plants under different nitrogen. And therefore, we do not recommend high rates of nitrogen. Then you can do those GAPs, judicious use of inputs, fertilizer, microdosing, mulching, and so on and so forth. As I finish, what are the practical sustainable intervention strategies? They are listed there. We need to inculcate and also adopt the 3 pillars of climate smart agriculture, that is adaptation, mitigation, and reduction of carbon emissions. Our carbon footprint should be low. So we need to do all these things that I've listed there. Because of time, I won't take time to read through them. But as I finish, I think we are all looking for a competitive and sustainable tea subsector, which we can bequeath the future generations with. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Professor. Let's once again give a big round of applause to Professor. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll now go to the question and answer session. We'll take a couple of questions for the technical bench. Please, could you ensure that the microphones are in the with the delegates, and also if you can have one microphone in front, please. So let's go to questions from the delegates, please. Yes, please. These are Mr. Mbugwa. Yes, we've got a gentleman there. It's right there at the back. Okay, there's another one there. Yes, and then after that.
Thank you. John Bogwa, EATTA. Just wondered how much tree shade you need in the long run to protect tea in some parts of India it's quite substantial. I don't know whether by the time we get to 2050, the tree cover will be at its maximum. What is really suitable, and is there at any stage, any competition between the trees and the tea? I forgot what else I wanted to ask. That's the problems of aging. No, let me leave it for now.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mbugua. Thank you very much. There's a gentleman there. Please say your name, your company, and the question.
Kirialame Kigara Growers Tea Factory Limited. Thank you very much, the professor, about hedging the risk, spreading so many clones in your specific particular garden or gardens or areas. One, how do we access information about the proper clones? Because here in Uganda, our research institute in Revitaba, I think, was affected, and we rely more on you across the border, our brothers. How easily can we access such information, and which would be the best suited for Uganda? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There was another question there. If you could kindly pass the microphones there. And we had, I think, engineer had a question. And in front as well, immediately after that.
Yeah. Thanks, Prof, for the good presentation. My name is Kawya Ronald. I work for the National Cultural Research Organization, and I'm heading to research. It's good someone talked about Revita, but that's where I'm based. You don't need to worry so much about the tea clones in Uganda. We now have information available. I'll be presenting on Friday. And we have a running memorandum of understanding with the Research Institute, Kericho, Kenya, which we signed last year. Back to the question. You talked about rationalized breeding to manage abiotic and biotic stress. For me as a researcher, I'm concerned you were not clear which particular ones did you do. Because in your presentation you said in some parts of Kenya now there is a shift. Places which were originally suitable, now tea is no longer suitable. So are you running away to the holy places only, or you are doing particular breeding to combat the low altitude so that people continue growing tea in summary without shifting away? So you are not clear on that particular slide. I would like to know the real rationalized breeding you are currently undertaking in Kenya so that we can also borrow relief from Uganda. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Kindly pass the microphone just in front there. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Engineer Nakuya from ATDA. Yes, this morning we had a scientist who was talking on tea health properties, and he was talking of tea having free radicals inside which help the body. Then he will be talk of these tea molecules. I'm saying this. I happen to know medicine which comes from tea. Why are we in East Africa or Africa not going to that to add value, and we can take it as medicine because the others are doing it. I found when I take a biscuit, it is full of tea. When I take something, then they tell me that the chakula ilikuwa chai. Why don't you put it that way, you scientist who was here in the morning? Then I have a comment here on professor. Professor, according to geography, we get water when the sea becomes hot. Water evaporates, and that evaporation actually comes to us on the land as rain. So what is happening when the ocean gets hot, and then we have no rain? Thank you.
Thank you, engineer. Thank you very much. Let's have a last question. There's somebody whose hand was up there at the end.
sir. My name is Secretary Cole from Uganda Tea Association. We have been saying all this time that in Uganda there is still more land for expansion, for tea expansion. And we have been saying in Kenya, it's already finished. May I know whether we still have more land in Kenya for tea expansion? Or it is already gone, you only have to go vertically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll first of all have answers to those 5 questions. So, Professor, please, if you could, I believe you may have written them down. If you could kindly attend to this. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. The issue of shade, how much shade is good for tea? There has been research that has been carried on this specific area where we have not only used shade trees, but also used artificial shade. You know the shade nets? You know the shade nets that are used in horticulture? Yeah, we have researched on the same because those nets come with different levels of porosity so that you can have 90% shade, you can have 30% shade, and 60% shade. Okay? And therefore you can vary the level of shading. And we have seen under Kericho conditions, we have not tried this elsewhere, under Kericho conditions, you get your highest yields at 60% shade. 60% shade. Which tells you that shading may be required to enhance yields. When we were removing the shades, we were removing the tree shades. Those were trees that were planted in tea plantations. And then the thinking was at that time that indeed shade was depressing yields, and we saw that. But it could have been a factor of competition or the choice of shade tree because we were using Grevillea robusta. And hence, we did the study that I have shown you some data there, where we tried different species, and we saw some species such as Melissia edura, which actually enhanced yields. So what is important is not just the intensity of the shade, but also the choice of shade tree, the species, that will not outcompete tea of water and nutrients, but that will also provide the kind of shade that you require for you to profitably grow your tea. So those answers are there, and we can share them. On the issue of diversity of clones, that information, I think my friend from Rabitaba said he will share that information. It's in the public domain. But for me to say this, suffice for me to say this, that generally, even though the Kenyan clones have not been tested under Ugandan production conditions, generally, we have tested the Kenyan clones in multiple sites to test for their adaptability. So there are clones that are known to be very adaptable to whatever conditions you put them under. And such clones that have broad adaptability are recommended for you in Uganda. And again, that information is in the public domain. Get in touch with Rabitaba. They'll tell you which clones have broad adaptability. Then I was asked about rationalized breeding. Yes, the rationalized breeding was driven by the fact that we ought not just to focus on yield and quality. For a long time, when I joined the tea industry, we were just driven on producing clones for yield and quality. Nothing else mattered until we realized drought was beginning to be an issue. Cold itself was also an issue. Pest and disease were also issues. And therefore, we rationalized our breeding program to try and begin to combine all these good traits. A clone that is high yielding, that is good in quality, that is also buffered against drought, is drought tolerant, heat tolerant, that is also tolerant to pests and diseases. Because as climate changes, disease and pest dynamics change. Something I didn't share with you, that I did some work for Osirte. This is a Rwandan, I think the Rwanda tea industry, before it changed, it was restructured and changed. And when I was in Rwanda, that must have been 2006, 2007, we had a World Bank funded project. I saw the worst kind of pest infestation I've ever seen on tea anywhere. And they had very serious red crevice mite infestation and very serious infestation of gray blight and brown blight. Unprecedented. And these problems that hitherto were not problems, I am assuring you, will begin to be problems here in East Africa as the climate changes. So we need, therefore, to buffer our clones against pests and diseases, and we must be ahead and must have bred clones for tolerance and resistance to pests and diseases, drought, and all these other issues. Somebody asked about tea as medicine. That's correct. Tea is medicine. And there's a growing body of knowledge, even generated locally here, on the efficacy of Kenyan tea in terms of its health benefits. A lot of body of knowledge now. On cancer, we've done work on cancer. Very novel work on cancer, on diabetes. He showed some data on obesity, anti-obesity. We've done even on so many other diseases. And increasingly, we are urging the Kenyan tea industry to go the Japanese way and diversify the uses of tea. Not just focus on CTC black tea, but ensure that we produce products that are fortified with tea. You go to Japan, they'll tell you this toothpaste has tea. You eat a cake and biscuit, it has tea. You take a confectionery sweet, it has tea. You take everything, it has tea. The bath soap has tea. Everything has tea because of the known and scientifically proven medicinal value of tea. He talked about tea and some of the problems of the skin. And in Japan, you find body lotions, everything with tea. And it's the tea industry doing it, not others. It's a tea industry that is actually driving the fortification of different products, especially fast-moving consumer goods. That's the direction that the tea industry in Africa must take. As I finish, somebody asked about the sea warming. If you followed my presentation, I said when you have sea warming, you get more precipitation. You get more precipitation, as you said, so you are right. When it warms, you get more precipitation, not the other way, okay? But then again, you see precipitation is also driven by winds and directions of winds. Because, yes, the sea can be warm on one part, but the winds drive that moisture elsewhere and not to your area, okay? And lastly, there was the issue of whether Kenya has more land for expansion. I may not be competent to answer this, maybe KTDA can, but I imagine there's not so much more land remaining for expansion of tea in Kenya. So we may be reaching the saturation point in terms of land for tea expansion. And possibly the future of the Kenyan industry, expensive as it may be, is to seek a program of uprooting and replanting, replacing the old clones that have low yields with new clones that have better yields, that are better quality. A replant program would be good, but it's fairly expensive. And I don't know whether small-scale farmers can afford. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think, ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, not unless there's a very burning question to Professor, yes, there appears to be two hands already. I think let's take those two questions as the last questions, and then we move on to the next presentation.
Thank you, Professor. I am Mubanjisi Jones from Igara Growers Tea Factory as a director. Mine is a compliment as well as an issue on policymakers. you mentioned water is the most important factor as far as tea production and increased productivity is concerned. And that at one time we may go irrigation. But I don't know whether these policymakers will help us. Because as we talk now, I don't know whether it is in Kenya, but in Uganda, the issue of gravity flow schemes, whose waters come from the hills, which hills are the best for the tea production, are causing a threat to us. And you also mentioned that the soils are becoming drier and drier. I imagine water tapped from the hills to some distance of kilometers and kilometers will have made that area where it has been drained drier and drier. How can we engage these policymakers involved in gravity flow schemes such that instead of making our soils drier and drier, we adapt what you told us and we engage irrigation in those hill areas? Is it the same in Kenya?
Thank you very much. Thank you for that question. I think there's a lady right behind you. Thank you. Please be brief.
My name is Lucy Morira from Perimka Greens. I've got two questions. One is a concern, then the other is a question. Greenhouse gases is one very crucial element in climate, with the warming. So what is it that we as the tea industry are able to do, at least to help this issue of climate change or the global warming? The other bit was on fuel wood. I don't know, he has not touched that, but it was a concern because fuel wood, we are using eucalyptus that goes for a minimum of 8 years to 10 years. And within those 10 years, you harvest, and as you are doing your coppicing, you've got a whole period of 4 years or 5 years before the ground cover has returned to its normalcy. And as such, we are actually losing on the carbon credits. What other alternative trees can the tea industry take, which have got shorter growth period, that can help, other than waiting for just eucalyptus, and in case maybe a pest invades eucalyptus, then we are lost as the tea industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we'll have Professor answer those two questions, then we move on to the next presenter. Professor, please.
Thank you. On the issue of water, I think that is a policy issue that maybe your government may be able to address. But what I know is that for most parts of East Africa, we are water scarce. We're actually considered water scarce. So whether we even have adequate water to be able to irrigate tea is questionable. Maybe Uganda is not water scarce, but I know Tanzania and Kenya are water scarce. So I think that is something that you may need to raise with your government. Secondly, I think as you think about irrigation, you must also bear in mind that it's fairly expensive. You have to invest in critical irrigation infrastructure, and that can be quite expensive. On the issue of global warming, greenhouse gases, and what we can do as an industry, I think there's a raft of things we can do. The use of renewable energy is one of them, and which I'm happy at least the tea industry, to a very large extent, is on this one. But again, they are just simple adoption of good agricultural practices should contribute to ensuring that our carbon footprint is low. And also other operations in and out of the factory by saving energy and all those kinds of things, and even how we transport our tea. So there are quite a number of interventions that we can put in place to ensure that our carbon footprint is low, and we also contribute to addressing this issue of global warming and greenhouse gases emission. Lastly, on the issue of eucalypts, Yeah, we did some research in Tea Research Foundation some years back. We tested different species of trees and different provenances of eucalyptus. But I'll tell you, eucalyptus came tops, even after testing all manner of species. It is the fastest growing. It accumulates high biomass and high calorific value. So in terms when you put it in your boiler, it gives you more energy per cubic meter compared to casuarina or other species that we tested. So at the end of the day, we came back to the same answer, eucalyptus. Now the issue you have raised about the coppicing and the shorter rotation periods, today they are hybrid eucalyptus which have been bred. Again, you can get into the public domains, get in touch with South Africa, they are very good at that. And today, we even raise eucalypts, not using seed, using cloning, using cuttings. And you can select the best trees and clone them. And these are available. A lot of information is available. You can get in touch with us. We can give you information where to get this. And you get the best provenances, which you can then use, which have got a shorter rotation period. And again, you must maintain a certain balance of wood fuel acreage vis-a-vis your tea acreage, so that every time you cut your wood fuel plantation, you are sure that you will have some to cut tomorrow. Okay? So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think once again, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause to Professor. Professor, thank you very much for those very, very useful insights on this topic of climate change. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be Dr. Dick Waswa. Dr. Dick Waswa is co-founder of Exito, a digital marketing space consultancy firm in Kenya dealing with marketing, packaging, influencing millennials, and adoption of e-commerce. He has had senior leadership roles in many corporates in Kenya with vast experience in top-level management and leadership and marketing in fast movable consumer goods such as Eli Lilly, Samia Africa, Kenya Network Information Center, Kenya, and World Bicycle Relief. He has participated as a management consultant for branding and packaging tea and coffee in Kenya under the Agriculture Food Authority AFA project between 2013 and 2018. He has had specific assignments in increasing competitiveness of Kenyan tea, packaging, marketing of tea to millennials, brand and marketing strategy, development and execution, creating unique customer experiences, route to market, and enhancing packaging for global competitiveness. Competencies include strategic management and leadership, business development, marketing, and sales strategy formulation, distribution, management. He's also a member of the Marketing Society of Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together and welcome Dr. Dick Waswa.
Good afternoon to you all. My name is Dick Waswa. I'm told I have a twin in Uganda, so I've come to see if I can get the twin. The twin is called Kato. Is that correct? Yeah, so thank you for the leadership of the East Africa Tea Traders Association for this wonderful opportunity. I am here to, having listened to a few of the previous speakers speak about how they are having tea at the auction, the fluctuating prices. And I think we do have something that we can put to the audience in terms of looking at where our consumers are. And when I'm going to really fly through this particular presentation, it would ordinarily take longer than the time allocated, but I'm going to fly through, bear with me, and later on we can actually see what we can pick up. Now, quickly, when you see the brands that are around, Nile, Tusker, and all that, we want to demystify what this thing is all about. What is a brand? And a lot of you people are familiar with this particular aspect of marketing. You can see the various brands that are there. They did not just happen from nowhere. I'm going to draw a lot of experiences and best practice from some of the global leaders, such as the Liptons as well as the Ceylon tea. Now, just to go a bit further, a brand is not an identity. A lot of people think a brand is an identity. I'm here to show you just how to create the brand and also how to get it to the market. But above all, there's a very interesting group that is lacking as far as our marketing is concerned. And these are the people called millennials. So briefly, that is the outline. As we proceed, I'm sure if I had a picture of the Nile beer, I would have also put it there. What is a brand? A brand is not a product. So these are exactly what I'm talking about. If you know what that particular feature is a picture of McDonald's. What a brand really is what the consumers think about you. It is not what you think about the product. So as we move further, you can see some good examples of companies that have been very, very smart at creating good brands. And what you will notice is, I've heard a lot about tea having being grown in some areas which is very good quality. We are assuming quality is not the issue here. What we want is to create an emotional link between your brand and what you have as the tea there and the people who are the consumers. So what exactly are we looking at here? You can see is what other people think about your brand. It's not what you in your factory, in your farmer groups think is a brand. Now, to put it into perspective, that is your consumer. What they perceive of you and your product is what is really a brand. And there are so many things that would really come through. So why care about branding? Why care about having a brand? The main idea is a brand is revenue, a brand is equity. You can actually trade with it. So a lot of us here, I know you are involved with commodities at Mombasa to make sure the tea, 90% or 93% gets to Mombasa, and then it fetches good pricing, if you're lucky. What I'm here to show is how you can create your own brand and be able to optimize the returns from that investment. So why care is because you might find a lot of your brands are not where customers are. This is a typical store or a retail outlet, and if you are not playing at that point of sale, then you've already lost part of the revenue you are looking at. I listened to Audrey in the morning talk about the 500 shillings that the farmers are now getting, and it has gone down to low. And I'm imagining, can we have an answer to this? Yes, we do. We need to change strategy, and strategy starts from you having your own brand and moving it forward. Now, a lot of brands or products are really similar. So this is the other reason why they are really similar. And if you were to pick from any of this, I'm sure a lot of you will be confused. So the reason why we create brands is to really be different, to create that emotional link, which is very, very important. Now, you can see there what the whole journey about brands is all about. In terms of direction, I'm sure it started with the tea, loose tea, now it is going into tea bags. So what exactly is trust? A lot of people buy products because they trust that product. And that product has to be trusted. That's when it's reliable, in the sense that people can actually work on it and they can actually depend on it. It can actually delight them. So once you achieve those two, then you are able to create a brand. So these are successful brands which have been created. Starbucks, I'm picking from the beverage so that it relates a bit closer with the tea. Because if I pick something different, then that would be not very, very fair. Now, there's something called a brand promise. What does your brand promise to do? The moment you have your brand promise meeting the expectation of the consumer, then you know you have a brand. Otherwise, you're just trading in a commodity. You can as well send the tea to Mombasa, let it be auctioned. Now, for us here, at the end of my talk today, the only thing I would want you to really take away is, can you create a customer experience? It is no longer about the quality of tea or how functional the tea is. It is the experience the consumer gets from taking your tea. And I'll be able to show you how to create some of those experiences. So over and above price, promotion, place, and all that are typical of any brand, we are taking that as a given. You should now be able to look at how do you create a brand. So quickly, how do you create a brand? I was very impressed to hear the Ugandan story today. The Ugandan story is one which has evolved over time. Tell your story. Tell your story about where your tea comes from. People don't want to be told about volcanic soils, about what other thing I keep on hearing, where the highlands is coming from. That is already a story that is too stale. People want to hear exciting stories coming from those areas. And you can actually use technology to say that. Now, I want to really go to this particular example, which is Lipton. Lipton has done a fantastic job of creating a brand. Lipton, together with Ceylon tea, for those of you from Sri Lanka, you will agree with me, those are the global leaders. I'm sure they take your tea, go blend with other tea, and make this brand. Some of them have no idea what you're going through the farms actually making the tea. So the story of Lipton is more than 1800 after AD, that is 1800. So it started from a very long time ago. This gentleman had a story which he wanted to tell. And those days, they used to have high teas. Tea was an experience. You leave your house, it is a ceremony. You go and sit and actually make sure you have tea as an experience. It is not just walking out there and picking a cup of tea. The way we were told, every 2 hours you should be having tea. This is one of the ways which the experience was being created. Now, in those days, as early as the 1800s, you can see the gentleman is already doing promotions just to get people to do, to take up his tea. That's the Lipton tea. Like I said, I'll quickly run through. Ordinarily, I will be a lot slower than this and try and see how this is useful. So the Lipton teas is a story I would want to benchmark on, but also try to draw you closer and tell you, you need to put a lot of investment in this. There are a lot of key decision makers here. You own a lot of the tea, so you need to see what actually is involved. Look at that. There's a bit of environmental concern. That is a story you can run with. And Lipton has done a fantastic kind of story with the Rainforest Alliance. They simply tell the story the way it is. These are the stories that are selling out there at a premium with your right brand. Look at that. Coming up with the tea bags. That is more like a fast story that Lipton really brought to us. So it is also being the fast, investing a lot of capabilities, and being able to know what exactly to do. So what are some of the lessons you get from Lipton? One, they have very consistent. You will always know whether it's a Lipton brand from the color, from the identity, from how the brands hang well. You can almost know the DNA of Lipton by looking at each of the brands. Just have a look at that. Now, like I said, you just don't create a brand. You have your idea, you have your story, and then you actually involve experts. Marketing experts who are able to assist you, who should be able to tell you how to navigate through the journey of creating this idea. So it can be a whole hazy story that you have right now, but all in all, if you use the experts, then you get to the right situation. And try to make your brand charismatic. Charismatic isn't anybody who is very loved, and he can be followed anywhere. So even brands can actually get to that point. Now, there are disciplines that you probably require when you are creating brands. One of them, look at that. It looks like a perfume, isn't it? The ladies who are here. But that's a brand of tea, and it's sitting on a shelf. So as we are here, look at that. You need to create some kind of differentiation. The first thing you need to do to separate a commodity from any brand is you need to differentiate it. Number two, you need to collaborate. I don't know if there's a tea shop in Kampala that you can comfortably go to and even have tea. So these are the kind of collaborations that you need. Discipline, innovation. I know Madam Audrey I'll mention a bit of her because she was saying technology is a bit of a challenge. Now you can't run away from technology, and you need to use technology. I'll show you on the next group of consumers why you need that. If you don't innovate, then you're simply going to die. Validate. Anything that you do, if the consumer actually looked at your brand by covering the logo, can they be able to know that is your brand? Can they be able to say, I want this brand? Number four, discipline. You need to have discipline. You need to create the brand so that it's very consistent. If it is like a duck, let it be a duck. And let it not be something else underneath and things like that. Yeah? And despite the packaging, this is one beverage that has done exceptionally well as far as the branding is concerned. You can see the same identity which is taken through, although the packaging can be very, very different. And you need to have innovative concepts. Concepts such as this. You can imagine this is a tea shop somewhere in the UK and giving a tea experience, whatever I was just mentioning there. Now, in terms of innovation, you can actually choose packaging. Look at Lipton and how it's able to give its packaging. A lot of the youth are actually using tea in cans. So iced tea, that's the direction to go. I heard a lot about diversification, so this would be the direction to go. Design, just the way the design of the packaging looks like. This can be a form of of innovation that you need to look at. And I'm looking at best practice so that you can actually benchmark and see whether this suits where you are. Look at that with Lipton. And also very innovative design. Some of them, if they were put where perfumes are or colognes, you could think they're even colognes. But this is tea. The power of innovation. Now, this is what Lipton has done. You can see there's a generic thread among all of them. They look like they are from the same parent. This is hanging together. Let your brands hang together. Let it not be like day and night. We've done a lot of work with the Kenyan circles as well as some corporates, and we can see a very good change in terms of how they design and even brand their products, coming to probably levels like this. And this should be able to compete internationally. Now, innovation can also mean giving your consumers something which they use to take tea. These are gadgets which they can use to take tea, and looking at that. So if you brand some of these gadgets and they are actually available to your consumers, you're one step in the door as compared to somebody else who is not even thinking about your consumer this way. Like I said, always start with the consumer in mind. Now, the big idea should always be there. Like I said, involve the experts and then build upon the idea. One of the things you need to do now is, once you've created your brand, is to introduce your brand. And there are issues which involve use of media. I'm not going to tell you that you have to use radio and TV. There are very innovative ways that are cost effective that you can use to actually introduce your brand. And they will still resonate with your consumers, depending on whom you've started. Now, this is why it is important. You need to have the right media to get your brand to them. Put it another way, somebody in the US has a drone. He wants to shoot or eliminate somebody in Somalia. He uses very sophisticated kind of methods to find out where that particular enemy is. Now here, in your case, is your consumer. You need to know where they are. Look at that application of media. Just for some of the brands locally, you can see that is Lipton, Coca-Cola. I want to just show you how they express themselves in some of the outlets or retail outlets that are really there. And you can pick it up from there and see how well you can actually do. Now, there is one common problem we seem to have. 70% of our population is the youth. These are people below 35 years. It is a common thread. A lot of what I'm hearing is that a lot of the tea is being consumed by people over 35 years. I'm personally beyond that bracket of 35. But I can say, as tea industry, we've already lost the battle. If we are not targeting the people below 35 years, then you can be sure within the next 20 years, you will not be selling your tea anywhere. So, what are we doing about this particular group? This is just a brief summary of the various generations. I don't want to point out which one, but I'm sure those of you who are here, you can see which generation you are. I'm particularly going to look at the millennials, which is this group just before the very last generation. Now, these people grew up in a different environment. I want to show you where they are and how to target them. Because remember, 30% is the people who are taking tea. 70% are not taking tea. So when you hear good figures like 40% of the agricultural land in Uganda is the one under tea, and you are scaling it up, you should be targeting local consumption of this particular group. And this is how I'm going to show you how it is. I'm assuming, like I said, the tea packaging is correct. You have the right message. You have capabilities internally, and you've invested in your brand. So what are you supposed to do next? What are the issues? If you look, a lot of the youth are not taking tea, but they're taking coffee. Right or wrong? People below 35, are we together? They are actually taking something, and they are not taking your tea. People are actually taking ready-to-drink kind of drinks, which means your biggest competitor might be the likes of MTN, people like Safaricom, people like the ready-to-drink drinks like energy. This is Red Bull and all that. Now, what you have to consider is these people don't find tea cool or interesting. This is a generation that would rather take smoothies and things like that. So there are opportunities. From what I can show you there are opportunities for you to mingle with this particular group, and you just have to be very tactical. You just have to understand. In the work that we do, we work a lot with these millennials, and we are able to get a lot of insights as far as what they want and how we can actually target them. So this is a typical millennial. I'm sure some of you have those kind of guys in your house. Are they taking tea? No, they're not. So we want to show you what you should target them so that they'll be able at least to target and get your tea. These are people typically below 35 years. People think they are spoiled, but they are very unique in their way they do things. And one of the things they like is being engaged. They don't like giving them solutions and you think they would take them up. So you need to engage them. There are things which you need to follow through and be able to develop slowly. Now, as you look at millennials, they actually kind of ideal. They belong to the Facebook. They belong to the mobile phones. They want to do things in their own way. They are digital natives. So this is all I'm saying about the millennials. Now, if you are here, and maybe you even have a farm, you realize that millennials are becoming the dominant workforce, even in your organization. So you need to find a way of targeting them. Number two, they don't even want to do long-term careers. They would rather do 5, 6 years, 2, 3 years, and move on and do something else. They would want to casually, they don't want to dress the way we would. They would want to dress in jeans, Mark Zuckerberg. Those are the kind of people you're dealing with. So I'm just going to quickly run through, because in the interest of time, just where they are and how to target them. And my slide that you will see is that millennials like even good packaging. How you even design the package is something that will attract them. Number two, they want to see something that is cool. If they have iced tea, they can put in their backpack and actually go with it to school. I'm sure when my grandmother was growing up, she used to take water, put milk, put tea leaves, boil the whole thing for about 30 minutes. It was a ritual. Now, millennials are not going to do that. And that is a different ballgame you're dealing with here. So you have to know how to actually get them there. They are on the gadgets 24/7. What are you supposed to do? How do we connect them? We need to create an experience for millennials. We need to find where they are and try to engage them at that particular point. And this is what brings me to where are millennials. A lot of your millennials do not go to the retail outlet and shop. They would rather shop online. This particular group, like I said, are very difficult even as employees, in the sense that they have their own way and language in which they communicate. A millennial in Uganda will understand each other with a millennial in Kenya. And you wonder, they didn't have any interface. What actually happened? They are on Twitter, they are on Facebook, they are on YouTube. They would rather spend the money you give them on those particular gadgets than actually using it even to further a good cause somewhere else. So these are the typical millennials. You will find anywhere they take things called selfies. Yeah? So they would stand and all of them take a picture, put it on Instagram. That is who they are. They are not wrong. These are just their generation. Now, like I said, you need a good strategy for these millennials, and they are very good buyers. They command 70% of your consumers. So it is important you have to target them. Number two, if you look at where they are, that is their space. That is where they thrive. So if you have your messaging on radio and TV, trust me, you've already lost them. On newspapers, you've already lost them. They don't even read newspapers. They are on YouTube. They are on Facebook. They share stories. They would want to hear those stories shared. They are on WhatsApp and things like that. Now, I'm just showing you here a typical Twitter kind of post by this particular group. And like I said, sorry about this. I'll rush through now. You can see what the other groups are doing as far as targeting the millennials, and they resonate with this. Quickly, just look at the convenience. They want that particular convenience. They want variety. If you're giving them tea, give them in different packaging. They would want to see a tin, they would want to see a pack. They want to see something that looks like ice cream, for instance, or even yogurt. That is the kind of packaging they would want. And very lastly, if you look at even the different packaging that would attract them, this is where they are. So, we need some kind of innovation for millennials. And like I mentioned, I do have a small video. If you thought the millennials are a problem, I would just want the gentleman at the IT to play for you what here is a small kid who has been given Newsweek by the mother to read, and what the kid is doing with Newsweek. So this is the generation after millennials, which is going to be with us. What are they doing? They are swiping. They don't believe that Newsweek should be read with a page. So it doesn't work. Is it broken or something? Useless. So, like I was saying, these are your customers. after millennials. So we need to be prepared for them. And we need to find ways and means of connecting first with millennials before eventually we'll have this second problem of the people after the millennials. That one works. So these are 1 year old, already a digital native, and you have to sell for them tea. Can see how difficult it will be in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Waswa. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to Dr. Waswa. Thank you very much. I think we'll take a few questions, some 2-3 questions. The microphones, I think, are available. We've got Isaiah there. Please bring the microphone in front here, please. We've also got another microphone here, please, if you can just. In front here, please.
Thank you, really, Doctor. Especially the presentation is very good. Even we have seen how the future, even the existing condition is going on. What about the African market? If you have seen the coffee and the tea, we are a producer, but we are not a consumer. If you have seen the economy that we get, especially on the coffee, the total economy or the gain from the coffee is the total producer countries is around $19 billion. But the United States gets $27 billion from coffee. You know, the total producer country, $19 billion, but the United States alone, they got $27 billion. In Europe, which is 17 billion pounds. Therefore, you know, still there is a big market in Africa. We are not using that one for coffee and the tea. Therefore, what is your suggestion and opinion on this area? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Any other question? We've got a, yep, that right there in the middle.
Thank you. My question is on the cost of marketing. And I agree with the many examples you have given there, where maybe we may take advantage of them. It's important, typically, to tell us maybe a simpler way or a cheaper way of marketing, because we have witnessed some of our producers have tried to market outside the country. The moment they got the budget, it was more expensive than their own unit. So kindly guide us on that.
Thank you. Any other question from the room? We've got a gentleman there and another one there at the end.
Thank you very much, presenter. The incubation period between when you adapt to the innovations and technology and when you start to get the return, I think you can hear out the concerns or fears of the people here, the producers, is that they are going to invest their money and through advertising and marketing. But when will they expect a return? Because it's not that you wake up one day and you capture the market in that one day. It takes time, and it's from the patience and what that you will get or reap the benefits. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Thank you. We've got a gentleman there at the end.
Thank you very much. The other clip with those little girl was very impressive. And I've got a 3-year-old granddaughter who can beat most of us on ICT. You give her phones, she can do things that we cannot do. Now, the question is, if you are going to market tea using those kind of gadgets or the media, you've got the problem of access, affordability in terms of the ICT infrastructure. So how do you access the rural child or millennial if they are in the rural areas? Because of that constraint, how do we work together with the ICT infrastructure providers, access providers, and actually manufacturers of the gadgets themselves to make the media affordable so that we can use that as a media for targeting those young people? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that question. The last question is from in front here. Please make it brief.
Thank you, presenter. My concern is, where shall we get these millennials, even when in this room there is almost none of the millennials who will take the information there? This is a challenge that we must address here, that even when we have conventions of this nature, we have to incorporate the millennials right from here, because it is not easy to disseminate information from here to those people whom we have left behind.
Thank you very much. I think I can attempt to answer the last question. Yes, we don't have, but I think it is something that we can improve on. Thank you very much. Dr. Waswa, please.
Thank you very much. I really like the last question, where somebody is saying, where are the millennials? Actually, in this room, we may not have more than 10, if I'm not wrong. Sorry? Adrian is the only one, but I think a couple of others I have seen. The millennials are there. And like I said, if you look at the statistics that were being presented here, you are targeting your tea to, say, my parents and my grandparents. These are people within the next 10 to 20 years, they will not be existing. What I know, and I know probably maybe the KTDA might have better answers in terms of what they are trying to do as strategies, and the Ministry of Agriculture in Kenya, they are trying to make mainstream agriculture to look cool and something which the youth can also start working with. And the only way you're going to have the youth look at agriculture with those convenient eyes is by incorporating technology. Technology here means you're not going to involve them on the farm, tilling the farm and making the tea. They might be involved maybe at the stage of design, at the stage of packaging, at the stage of coming up with, for example, technologies that put the product on the shelf. This is what, on the contrary, a lot of your tea, like you've seen, goes to Mombasa and it's auctioned. You're creating jobs for Lipton. I don't want to sound like I'm against Lipton, but what I'm trying to say is the jobs and where the youth seem to be getting the benefit of your tea is out there. Ceylon, Lipton, and all that. So what I would say is we need to put proper incentives and also have these youths mainstreamed. If, for example, we can have a common user facility that does packaging, these youths want to sit on the computer, give you those nice designs of the packaging, which have barcodes, which have QR codes. Now, instead of you writing a whole story of what the tea is all about, you simply put a QR code onto the packaging. These guys have smartphones. They simply scan that particular code, and they can be able to read your story. You can even upload how your tea is made and put it as a YouTube. You don't have to spend so much. And I'm actually kind of just sensitive to the other question which looked at the cost of marketing. it needn't be that expensive. It just depends, like I said, start with the consumer in mind. Whom are you targeting? If you're targeting the millennials, then you need to be where they are. And probably that is where it is. But over and above that, we might need to do deliberate pushes to millennials. The most impressionable age for young people is when they are in high school up to college. If you don't get somebody in that period of time, you will never get them. Good brands invest themselves in that age group. You will find top brands actually spend a lot of dollar to make sure they make an impression for the people in that age group. So you don't have to be very extravagant with television, radio, and newspapers, print media. You can just need to be very creative and see where are your consumers and can you get them. So that is as far as the last question was concerned. Now, like somebody also asked, the US is getting about $27 billion from coffee. What are we supposed to do as tea? By the way, the millennials find coffee very cool and sexy, if I'm to use that word. They think, let's meet up for coffee is the new way of doing things. Those millennials who are here, you can bear with me, witness here. They are not taking, they don't say, let's go and have tea, which means there's a missing link somewhere. What I'm trying to say is we need to have a change in the strategy. Even in the strategy that Uganda is coming up with, you need to have a deliberate strategy of how you're going to reinforce this message to the people who are supposed to be using it at the retail outlets. And like I said, I was just running through the presentation. There's more that needs to be actually unearthed. And for the cost of marketing, like I said, a lot of you here make decisions on top of, on top in terms of your organizations. You may need to invest a bit more in marketing. Don't treat marketing as an expense. If you treat it as an expense, you will never invest in anything. You will always want to have good prices in Mombasa because it's the easier way option. If you saw what I presented there, Lipton started their story 1890 in Chicago, even promotion. Up to now, Lipton is still a brand. So it is a journey that you have to invest in, get the right capabilities and capacity so that you are able to actually build the brand with experts. If you remember what I mentioned there, it is very important to get it right from the beginning. Now, if you had a common kind of facility that a lot of the cooperative circles which might not have individual capacities can do, maybe you pull together, that could be a way that I would propose. But these are ideas which just need to be taken at policy framework and then they see what else can be done. As far as marketing is concerned, people, let's avoid thinking we have the best quality tea in the world. There's nothing like that. Consumers out there want to have a good experience with your tea. If they know your tea has a good experience, whether they're in China, whether they're in the US, they will Google, they will go to eBay, they'll buy your tea and it will get to them. They only need a good experience, maybe how it's prepared and things like that. So I would want to emphasize the use of technology here because technology can cut a lot of your costs. What you would ordinarily spend, you'll find with technology, you can drastically push down the prices and have more return on your investment. As far as probably the 3-year-old gadgets and making it affordable, trust me, it is consumer driven. A lot of these technology and gadgets companies, if the demand, for example, for smartphones grows, you will find the costs coming down. And even that rural millennial will actually be found. So it is something which I'm saying, let's look at them. Let's not only just focus on the elderly population, the elderly consumers, because those ones are transient, they're about to go, and you'll be left holding your tea with no consumer to take. Yeah, I think, and what I can only say is a lot of, even if it's a rural millennial, you will find them, they are on WhatsApp, they are on even Instagram, you'll find them. They still have those smartphones which can actually do that, and they are on Facebook. So those are channels, like I said, you can creatively use to reduce your cost but be able to market. But the most important thing, if you can pull together, if you find your costs are too high, pull together as circles, and maybe you can do a better campaign, better kind of hunting pack. That would be the direction to go. Yeah. So I think I have answered all that probably was there. If there are any other questions, we could be able to field them at a later time, and also contact through the IATA.
Thank you very much, Dr. Waswa. I think in the interest of time, unless there's a really burning question, I would suggest that we probably move on to the next item on our program. But before we do so, I would like to recognize the... Sorry, you had a question?
So I think it is important for we producers, and we know the levels we have in our packet does not go beyond the auction. How can we, as the producers, have that preference of mark of origin? Thank you.
Okay, we've had discussions about this mark of origin. If you look at the Mercedes-Benz, you only need to look at something from Germany and you know it's good quality. We believe Kenya should also have a mark of origin. And I think I have made a proposal in terms of the design as well as the policy framework around it, so that not everybody just jumps onto the mark of origin through using it. We have made that proposal, and I think it is being handled at the level of the Agriculture Food Authority as our last report. I tend to think you have a very valid point, because if we are able to designate a product from this region and people know about the quality as well as the rich volcanic soils and even the tests, that would be something that would be an added story to our already crafting story that we are taking as brands. So yes, it is being addressed, and I think if somebody from AFA was here, maybe they would give us an update of where they are. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's give a big round of applause to Dr. Waswa. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to recognize the presence of the Acting Director General of AFA, Mr. Anthony Muredi. Are you here? Mr. Muredi? I think he's not here. AFA, he was here, I think, earlier on. Maybe he stepped out. Anybody from AFA here? Right. Yes. Rosemary. Great. Rosemary is around. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got our last two speakers. They are going to be traveling shortly, and therefore we've decided to change the program a bit before we listen to our last presenter and basically present some small tokens of appreciation. So may I kindly invite Professor Francis Wachira to please come in front, as well as Dr. Dick Waswa. May I also request the chairman of the Tea Brokers Association, Mr. Tom Uchura, to please come forward and present the tokens of appreciation. Let us give a clap to Mr. Muchura as he comes forward. It's because you're a millennial. Yes, so we start with Professor Wachira. Asante sana. Yeah, and then Dr. Waswa. Thank you. Could we also have Adrin Kavosije, please. Kovusije. Thank you very much. And then last but not least, if we could also have Dr. Simon Ochanda. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Muchura. Ladies and gentlemen, and now we move on to our last presentation for the day. Just a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, we spared this for last because it's basically what you like most. And this is all about statistics and figures. Our next presenter is going to be Manuja Peiris. Is that the correct pronunciation? Thank you. Manuja is a chief executive stroke statistician from International Tea Committee Limited. He started his career as a tea taster stroke trader in Sri Lanka in 1977. He believes his passion for trading and his knowledge of tea trading makes a vital contribution to his work with the ITC. As a chief executive for 30 years, he has been responsible for steering the ITC forward, taking into account the diverse views of various stakeholders. An easygoing personality, he continues to form friendships with the tea industry personnel, which have strengthened the ITC in its effort to serve the tea world while self-generating 75% of its annual budget. Data in publications released by the ITC are recognized as the most credible data, and wider circulation of ITC publications has led to greater interest by tea companies to promote them within a target audience by advertising in the annual bulletin of the statistics. His tireless work has also resulted in an expansion of full, associate, and corporate membership categories of the organization. Ladies and gentlemen, please let's put our hands together to welcome Manuja.
Presentation. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you. We are in what's called the graveyard slot after lunch. Not the easiest, but I think we had two different but brilliant presentations, which I thought were very thought-provoking and exciting in one way as well, the second presentation in particular. But compared to that, mine is a much more simplistic one, so hopefully it'll keep you guys involved with the afternoon session. World over, smallholders have been bringing more and more tea to the table, but still complain of dissatisfaction with the industry. Some multinationals and corporates also work with the smallholders, resulting in increased production and lower prices. So the equation of supply-demand, which is a basic fundamental of a competitive marketplace, tends to be not taken seriously in our industry, particularly in the producer fraternity. perhaps as a result of distant interaction with the consumer and a limited understanding of market forces. In making an attempt to share with you a general overall trend of what's happening out there, the summary of points I will try and go through will be, we look at the global production in numbers of 2018 and by type, a quick look at the pecking order of exporting countries, auction averages, which we are all guided by, export FOB prices of major exporting countries, and we look at the 20-year trend of production, exports and imports at a global level. And we also have a look at perhaps a brief analysis of 7 of the major importing countries out there. Now these numbers are 2018, basically confirm that the 2 major producers were responsible for over 2/3 of world production. Of course, these 2 together consume 55% of it. The next 4 here, Kenya, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam, account for a share of 20% of total crop. Now, it's crucial to acknowledge that as much as we take an interest in individual countries, it is the global availability that kicks the market forces into action. And this increasing availability keeps prices at modest levels, with the price in Kenya being the yardstick for both CTC and Orthodox, though those prices could very well be higher or lower based on distinctive factors in particular or specific producer exporting countries. If my friends in Kenya continue at the pace they have, there will be even more tea out there at low price levels, which will accelerate the shift to CTC from Orthodox in most markets at lower prices, making most black tea producers simply niche players. So this slide gives you a general breakdown by type. Over the last 20 years, production has increased by 100%. Black tea has grown by 52%. Green tea has increased by 190%. And teas of other types such as oolong, pu'er, jasmine, etc. have increased by a staggering 386%, which indicates China's growth in production that reflects an increase of nearly 300%. This has to be understood with the reality that internal consumption in China has grown by 350% during this same period, helped by the fact that their exports, which were 30% of their production 20 years back, is now at a level of just 14%. With regard to exports, nothing much changes here, with China and India still managing to grab a share of 1/3 of total exports, and Kenya, Sri Lanka and Vietnam providing a collective share of almost 50% of total exports. Having understood the supply scenario, let's now look at how the prices have behaved. I plotted on this graph ex-auction prices, clearly accepted as the most transparent mechanism for sale of tea, or perhaps the only transparent mechanism, with timely cash flows to the producer, and also the yardstick for those engaged in forward contracts or any private sales. Prices of all teas sold at all auction centers are taken into account and converted to US dollars using midday exchange rates where relevant. Now, if we focus on the price levels over the recent 10 years, what we see is that since we came away from those rather dismal prices which we had historically, prices have been bobbing around that US dollar 250 mark. The price increases we see between the years of 2008 and 9 and 14 and 15 and 16 and 17 were when year-on-year growth of total production availability was less than 2%, and the crop export availability was tighter in Kenya. Now this slide depicts average export prices of all teas exported by the major exporting, or some of the major exporting countries. I've used unit 3 averages for the period 2016 to 18. Sri Lankan teas have earned an average of US $4.94 for their black orthodox range of teas, with a significant quantity exported in packeted form. Prices from China have been steadily rising in recent years, primarily for their green teas, and reflects a price of $4.64. Rwanda fetches $3.07 for their renowned teas of superior quality. India, boosted by the mix of strong domestic demand and exports, reflects a price of $2.96. And Kenya, the main CTC exporter, shows a price of US $2.80, highlighting price differentials between a country such as Sri Lanka, which went into value addition back in the 1970s and took the matters to their hands, and those who export primarily in bulk. Of course, the dynamics of the marketplace have changed in recent years, with goalposts being shifted by those in non-producer countries, which has made it that much harder for one to succeed in value-added exports, and that interesting absence of origin identity. This chart confirms that over the last 20 years, world production has doubled. But in the case of world exports and imports, the story is quite different. Once again, if you look at the more recent 10 years, export record, these are global exports, record a growth of just 15% compared with 31% in the earlier 10-year period. And with imports, in the more recent 10 years, imports record a growth of 16% compared with 27% in the first 10-year period on this graph. And in a way, this encapsulates the experiences of all those within our industry. Moving on to the next stage of my presentation, we'll take a closer look at how the imports have behaved, which in a way also we know have been fairly stagnant, and that's been a concern for, I would imagine, anyone along the value in the industry, wherever they might be sitting. Whilst tea is consumed in every country in the world, we do know that 7 of them are responsible for almost half of total imports. Leading the way is Pakistan, which continues to be the largest importing country and absorbed 11% of total imports of last year, having doubled their imports within the last 10-year period. Whilst there's known to be a further quantity of tea that comes across into the country through unofficial channels across the northwestern frontier, it is left to be seen whether Pakistan would take in larger quantities of teas as we move on. I'm sure it's quite clear that in this exercise I've used import volumes or perhaps recorded exports to these countries at 3-year intervals for the purpose of these charts. Next we look at the Russian Federation. Since the breakup of the USSR, imports into the Federation have been flattish, and with the tea bag becoming a force to be reckoned with, within a very short period of time since the tea bag was introduced to the Russian Federation, disappointingly, import quantities have not grown. But that again has been pretty much a common factor across most markets, or almost any market where tea bag has been introduced. Coming back to the Russian Federation, the general feel is that with the GDP running at a 6-year high and the resultant feel-good factors encouraging the popularity of alternative beverages, tea is unlikely to change its position in the Russian Federation. USA. We went through a period where terrific growth was witnessed in the US where 10% year-on-year growth was seen on many instances. But one just wonders now whether the market here again also is saturated with imports just about holding steady. Nevertheless, the fact that demand emanates for all categories of tea from different parts of the market, for black, green, CTC and orthodox of various origins, should encourage the exporters. In many countries within Europe, including UK, tea appears to be losing the genuine consumer's faith in spite of moves made by major packers in supply chain integration, sourcing, and transparency. However, when one takes into account the myriad number of certifiers applying pressure on the producers, one will argue that there is a clear reluctance on the part of importers who fund these certifiers to make their own mechanisms or price mechanisms known along the value chain. The recent takeover by Coca-Cola of the chain of Costa, a chain with a strong high street presence in 30 countries, including the UK, is likely to make a significant impact on the tea industry here, with further inroads being made by coffee, along with possible availability of alternatives to tea. Brexit is also expected to lead to an increase in cost of imports through volatile currency exchange rates, and coupled with the loss of some re-export trade to Europe, this is bound to have an adverse impact on UK imports that have continued to decline over any length of time. Now, a key market that continues to retain its thirst for tea, in spite of its share of problems, is Egypt. Annual import quantities are not at the highs of 100 million kilos that we saw in 2013 and 14, but imports continue to be in the range of 80 to 100 million kilos. Notwithstanding reports about high inflation, Egypt is identified as a definite growth market, and trade dynamics are such that it's difficult to imagine them looking at alternative origins for sourcing. Iran. Over the years, political upheavals, economic contractions, capital flight, sanctions, etc., have had no negative impact on tea imports here, and it is unlikely that we will see anything changing through this year. Trade is bound to experience some stuttering patches and subtle changes in modes of operation, but Iran is expected to source their regular requirements through this year, which I'm sure it's a rather optimistic comment, but going by past experiences where Iran is concerned, where we've always had certain volatile situations for a long period of time, but we've always seen situations where exporting countries have found their way around, and Iran has certainly made sure they do get their sourcing right. And finally, a totally green tea market, Morocco, absorbs increased quantities of tea each year, primarily from China, and has doubled its volumes over the last 20 years. But just a word of caution here, as a key importer has shifted its focus to infusions, which is likely to have an impact on the significant quantities that Morocco has been importing since of late. In conclusion, with the overall global demand in most non-producing countries remaining somewhat stagnant, as we've seen in these key markets, which are responsible for half of world imports, overall export quantities are not shifting upwards. Relatively lower population growth across the world, and combined with that wider choice of beverages we see wherever we turn up at, and these wider choice of beverages competing for a share at the throat for population not particularly is increasing at rapid pace, can be identified as the two main factors. And in countries where disposable incomes tend to improve, or with healthier GDPs, through product innovation, combined with efforts to ensure sound shareholder dividends, niche segments such as flavored teas, herbals, and infusions eat into the consumption of regular tea, and that at 2 gram or 1.8 gram portions, whilst more and more people still believe in making large quantities of tea available to the market. So unlike what we hear from the coffee industry of consumption hopefully coming to the rescue, following the large stockpiles and depressed prices which have led the producers to walk away from futures markets, there are not many positive indicators in the tea world. So on that somewhat not too optimistic, but which I feel is a rather realistic note, I thank you for your patience. And as I said at the beginning, afternoon slots are very difficult for speakers as well, and more so for the audiences. So I believe that I think we've all been very patient in the afternoon after lunch, and following on from the previous 2 presentations, I sincerely hope that mine's added something of value to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manuja. Let's give another round of applause. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that is or was our last presentation for the day. I would now like to invite questions from the delegates. Questions on the statistics, on the figures that we just saw, please. And our first question is from Mr. John Bogu at the back. Please, if you could pass the microphone, and the next microphone should come in front here.
Thank you, Manuja. My question may not have to do directly with the statistics that we saw, but it has to do with a concept of those statistics. About 20 years ago, I remember asking one of the senior traders in Mombasa, and at that time, actually, most of the information that we needed came from some of the large organizations in Mombasa, and I remember asking what did he think the outlook was for tea in the next 15 or 20 years. And his answer, which I remember very well, was that demand would likely overtake supply, and producers would be laughing all the way to the bank. Now, somehow, I don't think that is the reality on the ground today. But my question is, with all these things that are now happening, some of which you've mentioned, changes in consumer attitudes, the fame of tea sometimes being its own worst enemy, because more countries want to plant tea if they haven't planted tea before, and those who are planting tea just want to increase. And yet there doesn't seem to be a definite meeting of the supply and demand curves. As you go around the world talking to people and taking in the statistics, what seems to be the perception of a time when, because the world population is increasing, and within that increase there must be a proportion of people who are going to be tea consumers. There are countries where you'll not be able to grow tea anymore because it's saturated, but there are countries who are already thinking tea. They've not been growing tea, but they feel excited about tea. Do you see a time when, with all these things in the pot, tea will get to a place where, when we come here as delegates, we can actually smile because the industry is really doing well?
Thank you, Mr. Mbugwa. There's somebody in front here.
Thank you. My name is Edith Kuge from KTD. Just a little question on the statistics. You mentioned about the production having doubled, and exports and imports have only grown by 15 and I think 16% respectively. So where is that excess production? Is it that the proportionate domestic consumption has increased, or is it going to waste, or is it in values? And related to that then, what would you say is the future in regard to the same trend?
Thank you. We've got another question right there back.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Manuja, for the statistics. They are very informative about the industry, although they don't give us a very positive outlook. But what I wanted to ask of you is about China, the China market, in consideration for tea from the region, from East Africa, because what we've had is that the changing trends in China with the improvement in the life standards is changing towards black tea, mainly from what they are used to, green tea. And probably there is a preference for black tea from the region. So you could give us the outlook. Is that true? Is there a possibility that our tea will have a market in China? And what is the future outlook in that direction? Thank you.
Thank you, Bwana Kamano. I think
Hello.
we had a question from Bwana Jama.
Yes, sir. I need to clarify little information which Mr. Manoj has given. You said that CTC is overtaking Orthodox in the world market in some places. Is it because of price or quality or combination of both? Thank you.
Thank you, Bwana Jama. I think Bwana Mboy has a question.
My name is Dr. Mbui. My question is on value addition in Sri Lanka. I think there is a notion that that value addition really helps the farmers there, but it may be misleading. And I wanted to clarify this because what I know about value addition in Sri Lanka is the government of Sri Lanka has put incentives for value addition. So the producers produce tea, and because of that conducive environment, many private investors have invested in value addition. They buy tea from the local farmers, they do value addition, and when they export the tea, the average price for export for value added for teas in Sri Lanka is much higher than other producing countries. But that does not necessarily mean that the farmer in Sri Lanka gets more than other farmers in Kenya, Uganda, and other countries. That means the country generally benefits from higher prices or higher revenues in tea exports, but not necessarily the tea farm himself. Can you clarify on this, and if there are some few value-added teas exported by the small farmers, what are those percentages? So that we clarify this issue, because people have a feeling that value addition helps the small-scale tea farmer, yet it's a conducive environment of the government in that country that people are able to come, do value addition, export tea, but the farmer gets as little as other farmers in other countries. Can you please clarify?
Thank you, Dr. I think let's first of all take those ones so that we can then take the second round of questions. Manuja, please.
Ooh, I'm sweating. John, first one. I might turn out to be like the guy you spoke to 20 years back. I think as much as it might be disappointing news to most of us here, my answer is no. I just can't see anything looking that bright and positive, because as much as in life you have ups and downs, you have in business profit and loss, you have ups and downs always. I mean, and tea business is a long-term thing. John, a senior stalwart, I'm sure you can vouch for it more than anyone else. So you will have these ups and downs. But what's happened in the recent 10, 20 years is that we really don't see anything, whilst the input costs of the producers are going up immensely, with their constant ongoing devaluation, paying for all the things that they put in there. But at the other end of the chain, I think tea is almost fighting, I don't want to say a losing battle, but it looks that way out there, because lots of beverages led by water seems to be taking the place of tea. So that is why, I mean, I have spent all my life in tea since I left school. But sometimes I wonder whether tea fits this century. I mean, that's my answer to your question, John. And lady from KTDA, what I meant to say there was that product exports had grown just by a lower percentage in the last 10 years compared to the previous 10 years. Obviously, some of that or most of that is retained in the producer countries. But the point I was trying to get across was that exports are not really shifting as a total unit number from the amount of tea produced in the world because imports aren't growing. Is that clear enough? China. I believe China got this sort of novelty value of black tea roughly about 15 years back approximately. Because I think, you know, they were obviously primarily green tea guys, producers and consumers, as we know. So initially it came from the new rich crowd in China who thought that drinking tea or being associated drinking black tea could be, you know, sort of a positive thing to be seen to be. And that's how it came about. And that's continued, I think, in a way for a while. But having started with very small numbers, if I remember correctly, they probably import about 35 million kilos of tea now. And also, if I'm correct, I think Kenyans themselves have, I think, managed to increase their market share fairly well in the last 5 years or so. So I'm sure it's a positive sign. But we mustn't forget that China is also a large black tea producer. I mean, China produces more black tea than quite a few black tea producing countries, like for argument's sake, Vietnam or Indonesia. So, you know, China produces more than 230 million kilos of black tea. So it's not that black tea is not something they're used to, but it's just that they got used to these imported black teas at one time. And naturally, like with anything else, you'll have a supply and demand situation, plus the novelty value is always there, and that's, I think, what's helped the black tea imports into China. Then there was a question about the CTC. CTC. Yeah, it's solely on price because we only have to look at history. I mean, you look at three other major markets, UK, Pakistan, Egypt, which were almost 100%, at least in the case of Egypt, definitely, orthodox markets up until early 1990s. Today it's 100% CTC market. So it's price. I mean, I will say openly anywhere, if Ceylon tea or Indian tea is available at 170 today, all those buyers from Egypt, Pakistan and UK will run to those countries. Consumer preferences are led by price, not by categories or anything like that. I mean, you ask any consumer out there in any corner of the world, do they go to the marketplace to buy CTC or orthodox? They buy what's made available by their packers or supermarkets. So, I mean, I believe it's price. Tough question, value addition. I think what happens with that, Charles, is that value addition benefits the producer because the exporter, by sending the tea packed in value-added form, is in a better position to fetch a better price from their buyers. So the moment the exporter does that, the producer benefit. And we mustn't forget, in Sri Lanka, for argument's sake, the cost of production is supposed to be above $4, and some quoting $4.50. So they can't continue in the industry. I mean, they may not continue in the future. I mean, they are going through a very rough patch because not many people out there in the world are willing to buy tea at above $5. So they are on a very difficult wicket. But that's how it has worked. So, and this is why I've always brought the argument that if any tea out there in the world is sold in Colombo, I mean, I believe personally that tea will fetch $1 more. Because those who are sitting at the auction will buy those teas into their blends, into their packs, and export because they know very well their potential buyers or their buyers will certainly pay a better price than just exporting in bulk. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I started by admitting that we are all brothers here. And
sisters too. And
Sorry?
sisters. And sisters.
Oh, in the spirit of family, when you mention the father, you mention the family. Even in our African culture, that's what it is, really means. I want to say that we are here to help one another, and figures doesn't lie. You have given us the figures. And with the spirit of being us religious, sometimes truth is very important when we are told about the truth. And a philosopher one time asked, what will happen if the assumed becomes the reality? Now we have seen the numbers, and very soon it's going to be a reality. I think if I may talk about Kenya, in early 60s, not that we had other options other than tea. We were poor, there was nothing like cash income, so we all went to the tea. So it's also important, when we are going out there, it's also important to advise us what would happen if this assumed becomes a reality. Because that is where we are going. We have heard the cry of our sisters from Uganda and brothers that where they are. That is where we are heading. Kenya, we are almost giving our end of year payout. We don't know who will read those numbers because they are so scary. So I think it's important, as you go out there, kindly also advise us what is also good for our soils, because the reality is finally going to catch us. I remember the spirit of rainforest certification. It has really helped our farmers, because we have educated our farmers that other than the tea, being dependent on other dependent of the family. You need to have a cow, you need to have... So I think at this forum, let's be sincere to ourselves and let's face future with boldness. Thank you.
Yes, that wasn't the question. I mean, I think that's all the questions, but I think I'll come back if necessary, but I must thank the audience, because I think it's a very lively audience, which really makes it that much more interesting.
Thank you very much, Manuja. I think we've got two more questions that are still... I see Tushara. Is that Tushara? Yes, I see Tushara, and I see another hand at the end there, and another one. Please, let's make our questions very brief. It's already 5 o'clock, and we wouldn't want to keep you here, for too long. Please go direct to the question so that we can then have answers, and then from there we conclude the session. So please, Tushara. There are 3 microphones. Let's have one with Tushara. I think there's a lady there. Please carry on.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, the presenter. I'm Amelia Namanya from Chamungati Company. The presentation was very nice, and it has given us a picture globally. But what is confusing me a bit is that we have not known our contributions per country. And I think it was going to be more clearer to know how each country is contributing towards the global market. Is it possible to get that information?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Tushara, please.
Yeah. I'm Tushara from Empire, Kenya. My understanding is in Sri Lanka, all the producers sell their products through the auction system. Whatever they produce, everything goes through the auction system. Whereas in East Africa, the producers are allowed to go through the auction system, as well as they are allowed to sell their produce privately to the importers. Now, Manuja, do you think that this has an impact on the prices? Are we shooting ourselves by allowing teas to be sold directly from the producer to the importer? Thank you.
Thank you, Tushara. The next question I think was in front here. Please kindly give the microphone to the gentleman on the second row. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Nwaga Wanabos from Igala in Bushen. According to statistics, it seems it is the law of demand and supply that determines the price of tea from Mombasa and globally. And from the beginning, by presentation by Adrian, in Uganda, we have seen that there are 200,000 hectares available for production, but only 22% is utilized. So I wanted to get clarification from the presenter whether we can hold to the usage of 22%, 28% I mean, which is not under production, because if we produce more, then we get less, the law of demand and supply applies. So can we tell our farmers down that they hold production of tea? That is my concern.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we take one last question. One very last question, if there's any. There appears to be none. Manuja, please.
Yes. First question for that lady. I think I basically try and always give or share with any audience the global picture. I mean, it's very clear it's impractical to touch upon individual countries, but of course in doing so and in giving the global picture, I'm sure countries will come into account. So I hope you appreciate the fact that it's for practical reasons that it will not be possible to highlight particular countries as you raised. With regard to Tushara's question, I believe price transparency at the auctions have always been a tried and trusted method. But in a free world, I think producers, I'm sure, have their choices that they can make, and I believe they do it. And it's for them to determine whether it's good for them or not quite good for them. Perhaps they feel that it's better to have the eggs in different baskets, but it's a choice one can make. But I suppose, generally speaking, for Colombo, they up to now they seem to feel that any tea put upon for sale at a public auction is bound to reach the widest possible potential group of buyers, and that in turn will give that tea the best price. So that's how I feel, Tushara, if I may say so. Yeah, and then the last question was about usage of land. But again, I mean, these are all choices. I believe also politicians around the world, it's not only a case of East Africa or any particular country. We have seen this in many countries. I think politicians use smallholders as vote banks, and they feel or they believe that if they were to encourage those people in remote places to grow tea, and that's another vote in that ballot paper. So I think people need to be savvier today, irrespective as much as I mean, say we say so, but people out there in the world do make their choices in any remote corner. They have access to the internet, they use their mobile phones. I don't think they ought to be governed by what sometimes people say, or they are being misled. So I think with the information that's out there, people should make choices, but I believe at the same time, just if somebody wants a simple question and answer your question, probably people will feel out there when you look at the supply and demand situation, there is enough tea out there. That's it, Gideon, isn't it? Thanks very much. And once again, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Manuja. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for... Thank you. Thank you. It's been a long day. It's now 5:10, and I think it's about time that we brought today's session to an end. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've covered quite some bit today. We, of course, started off with Adrian, who took us through the Uganda story. We then had a presentation from Dr. Simon Ochanda. That presentation actually was meant for tomorrow, but on request from the minister, we had to have it done today. That is why you saw the bit of technical hitch. Thank you, Dr. for still making it to present despite the short notice. We also have had a presentation from Professor Washira on adaptation and mitigation to climate change. We have had an opportunity to listen to Dr. Waswa, branding and marketing of tea for the 21st century customers, including millennials. And last but not least, we have just had a presentation from Manuja on trends in the global tea market. I think it's been a wonderful day. We do apologize for the technical hitches early on in the day. I think we are now more or less sorted. Tomorrow we shouldn't have those. I think without any further remarks, I would just like to invite Mr. Chiampati to present a small token to Manuja, and then we'll have the MD brief us on tomorrow's program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lirionka Tiampati, for that. We want to appreciate also the support accorded to this conference. We've had a long day, ladies and gentlemen. It's just the first day, and I'd really want to appreciate you that we've been able to sit in despite the number of sessions. We've covered even an additional session over and above, but we're all intact. We're all inside, listening, giving contributions, asking, seeking, and knowing which is the best way forward. So I really want to appreciate the good contributions so far made. It's really, if we continue at this rate through to Friday, then it will justify why IATA should continue holding this conference for 2.5 days and not 1.5 days. So the test is really on, the ball is actually on your court. I believe we shall continue keeping this tempo going through to the last day. Now we've come to the end, and we're breaking for tea. The tea will be served at the same point as we did in the morning at the exhibition area. Kindly also take time to visit the stands to see what is happening. You can't just have sessions alone. Look at the practical side. So I would like to appeal to you to visit the 25+ stands that we have, share, exchange ideas, and let's see the best way forward. We are wrapping up for the evening, and it's good we are breaking in good time so that we can see Kampala by day and into the night. But please, let's meet tomorrow promptly at 8. The program says we start at 8:30. I would like to appeal that you come by 8 so that you can start by visiting the stalls, and then you can come in by 8:30 so that we start together. Otherwise, without much ado, we've come to the close. I would really like, as a matter of good culture, somebody to, a tradition, somebody to pray for us as we break for the evening. Do we have our pastor here, Caesar? Is Caesar around? Karibu. Please come forward and pray for us. And then there is a form which we've asked you to select. A good number of you have filled. It's just ticking 2 boxes. Which 2 are the 2 preferred topics you would like to have on Friday? We would like to analyze that today so that by tomorrow we can make a decision. We have also other very good sessions which we could add on in place of any if we find that there is a deficiency in participation. So it's important all of us fill this form. It's just a matter of ticking. There's a breakaway session in the before tea and one after tea break. Tick that, it will help us analyze and we can make a decision by morning. Otherwise, good evening and all the best. Thank you very much.
I think we can stand up so that we can pray. Thank you. Let's believe and pray. Thank you, Lord, for the day that you have given us. Thank you for the fellowship that we have had together as producers, as buyers, as traders, as brokers. We trust that all that we are deliberating here will be good for this industry. And we pray that even as we go through this hard moment, Lord, you will provide and that things will change for the better for this industry. Anything negative, Lord, move it from our way and let us be an industry that will prosper. In Jesus' name we pray.